Knowledge is collective, it's shared. We know things are true because other people validate that they are true. And so there's this consensus building that occurs when we're trying to find what the truth is, particularly in academic settings, particularly in research, right? And there are other spaces where this is a bit different, like in spirituality or religion. But when we're talking about academics and building knowledge through a research method, we uphold certain practices and principles that allow us to collectively agree that something is true. And so you've experienced this already in the schooling that you've had. There's this agreement reality of things that are considered real, like who writes your textbooks in high school and who the curriculum that you're taught in school. Those are all things that people have agreed to in a certain capacity. And obviously there's power differentials and whatnot, but there are things that we all collectively agree to, like that gravity exists, that when I put something in the air, it will fall down. That is experiential reality. I can actually test it through my own lived experience. And so agreement reality, experiential realities coexist together, and that there are certain things that maybe we haven't observed, but we've been passed down through our education to know that is true. Whereas experiential reality is what we've actually experienced and gone through in life, that we've found to be true because we've visibly seen it, we've physically experienced it. And so a lot of research is using experiential reality within a very specific way to develop agreement reality. And so as I spoke about, the way we are all educated is there's the secondhand knowledge that provides us with a starting point for how we can develop our own inquiry. And inquiry is asking questions like research questions, or just wondering about how patterns and trends work in the world. And the secondhand knowledge that we have experience towards is usually developed by tradition and authority. So tradition are educational practices that we all believe in. It's the way about which we teach. Authority are people who have been seen as experts on a particular topic. And so within criminology, those would be people like Sutherland, like Becker, like canon is the sort of base of the people who have historically been seen as the experts or the founding fathers of our understandings. And so as I was alluding to earlier, empirical research allows us the ability to test those agreement realities in actual experiences. And in order to do and say that something is true, there are certain criteria that we need to meet in order to make sure that we can accept the experiential and agreement realities. And so there needs to be both empirical, like some type of tangible space in which we can point to the agreement reality, and it needs to be logical. So for example, I cannot say that that mental health issues cause crime if the actual experiential reality is that after people were criminalized, their mental health issues are existing. There's also time and space and context that play into the strength of our assertions. And so methodology, as I was saying, it's the science of finding out, and it's like how we go about learning, how we go about finding, how we go about generalizing about specific truths. So theory, as we sort of talked about before, here's a good definition for you. it's a systematic, that's the important part, explanation of observed facts and laws that relate to particular aspects of life. It's usually answering why questions. Why does this occur? How do we understand particular things? What types of things cause other types of things? It's all about relations of concepts, abstract concepts to each other, and sort of finding out where the consistencies are across all of these relationships in a systematic way. And so as we're trying to do this, we have our own lived experiential reality, which is often seen as bias, right? And so we all can't be completely objective. So what we rely on in science is an intersubjective agreement. So if there's multiple of us who have written a specific paper and worked on a specific research design, then there's more likelihood, and have seen the same thing, then there's more likelihood that what we've seen is true. So there's this sort of, as I've said, consensus of building knowledge. There's this democratic way in which if multiple people think something exists, then it does exist, right? But when we apply research methods to that and consensus, then that ensures that we can be a level of objective if we're agreeing about the tools that we're using. So hypotheses are often what we use to determine whether or not something is true. So we're often in science framed within this binary means two framed perspective of things, of something exists or it does not exist. There's no in between existing, right? So usually when we're developing our questions, our inquiry, the topic we want to research about, we come up with a hypothesis. Social disorganization causes crime. There's a hypothesis. The null hypothesis of that is social disorganization does not cause crime or does not influence crime. So there we see that there's got to be a counter to our hypothesis. And if we see that counter, then that means our hypothesis is wrong. And usually we test for the non-existence of our hypothesis rather than looking for a hypothesis in space. And we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of that, but I just want you to be aware that hypothesizing things is like the core component of scientific research and is really important. There's also paradigms, so frameworks in which we look through life through. So that could be psychology. That's a framework in which we're looking at particular concepts and abstract notions that have been developed in psychology. Or sociology, we're looking at relations of people and social constructs within sociology. So there's different, like, the world is so diverse of so many truths that you could state, but there are certain disciplines and academic areas that focus on looking at one aspect of that truth. And that's their paradigm. So finding the truth is really difficult, obviously, but there's sort of a gradient by which we do it. So there's theoretical orientation, which is sort of what I was talking about in regards to sociology or psychology. It's sort of the framework and the specific areas that you're looking at, the abstract concepts. And so you create logical constructs and assertions from those theoretical orientations, and those develop into more specific theories. So there's like theory, and then there's a larger theory, and then there's reality, right? And so they're sort of hierarchized, and the more abstractly we talk, usually the less grounded in reality we are. And so there's this empirical testing and research methods allows us to connect and bridge those two. And so in theory class, you were talking about theoretical concepts and actors, like the danger triangle of like the specific necessities for crime to occur, and some causal statements. So if there's a opportunity, a crime, and a victim, then crime will occur. That's a proposition that like situational crime prevention theory posits, right? And so at the empirical level, we would operationalize those variables. Okay, what is a victim? Are a victim and offender mutually exclusive? Can they overlap? Those are types of questions when we're testing a theory like that we think through. And then we form a hypothesis and test it for its counter, as I spoke about earlier. So the goal of inquiry in criminal justice is usually to understand relations, patterns, and to make predictions. And predictions is a really big focus of knowledge production right now. And so usually we're centered on causal reasoning, so X causes Y. Then there needs to be a time logic, X must come before Y, as I spoke about before. And so we can either focus on understanding the many X's in relation to Y. So if I want to know what causes crime, what are the many variables that cause crime? Or we might understand a subset of Y. So what are the variables that cause property crimes? Is going to be different than crime in general. So a lot of research is also just listing things and organizing them. So we see, even as I'm talking through this, I'm talking about crime and now I'm like reorganizing it into smaller components that are more piecemeal. So it may seem intimidating, but it's also very accessible, and literally anyone has the capacity to research methods and to prove their truth. And because we're often focused on causes, and we'll get more into ethnography rather than like quantitative methods and the different types of research, but usually we're focused on probabilistic reasoning. So we're usually can't say X causes Y in every instance. Usually it's instead, on average, X causes Y. So you might not see the pattern or the truth in 100% of cases, but those exceptions are anomalies or outsiders, and they might tell us something in and of themselves about knowledge. But usually we're speaking from a likelihood. So usually when you're reading things, it's that, and research has found findings, and there's a percentage, like youth who were exposed to trauma are 30% more likely to commit crime. That's a likelihood. That's not going to happen in every single instance, but it's an average of the reality in which we see, because there are so many diverse realities. And as I spoke about in the first video, when we're dealing with this higher truth, there's often bias and error, because we are not all omnipresent, godlike creatures that know everything at one time. So oftentimes we deal with inaccurate observations. We might see what we project onto other people, overgeneralizations. You may have a negative experience, and because you have a negative experience, you think that every time a specific thing happens, you're going to have a negative experience. So, and then there's selective observation. Maybe you're only seeing an aspect of the population that you're interested in, and you're not realizing it. So some things that we can do to overcome these three specific errors and biases is by using measurement devices, so like a ruler, or categorizing things with criteria that you clearly outlined prior. doing replication studies of particular findings in different contexts maybe, and specifying in advance like sampling, the number of observations you're going to do, how you're going to sample the population to make sure it's representative. And we'll get more into the specifics of how to do these, but these are just generally what are the issues. And we have to use logic consciously and explicitly. And we have to guard against influences of political agendas and ideology, and that's really difficult, especially in the criminal justice system, which is often funded by the government and is often very practically oriented. And sometimes things just happen where computers mess up, or maybe you observe something wrong. It's perfectly fine that sometimes things mess up in research design, but there are certain precautions we put in place to reduce that error. There's always going to be error though.